Welcome to Fast Effect Double Speed Magic the Gathering. Here we have the finals. ELD Legacy Open Championship. Rob on Grixis, Shadow on lands. A lot of success in our weekly Legacy events. Friday. It's there with this lands list. It is brilliant, powerful, not the easiest thing to play against. It kind of feels like it's a low grindy deck, but sometimes they just make a 20-20 on the second turn. Tend to skew towards the more certain lines. Soul Guide Lantern on the first turn. Saga as well. This could cantrip to draw a card or keep this graveyard small, ensuring that an early Murktide doesn't become a problem. Map is in as well. Key card here, Rob using it for tempo rather than waiting. Try and break up the Dark Depths combo later on. Certainly trade-offs to either side of that. I would tend to agree with Rob's assessment of the situation. This lands really gets going. Lies all their mana repeatedly. They can generate quite an advantage. Life from pile on when those lands are more like spells than lands. Fifth, Murktide Regent at bay. Versus Saga, one of the bigger additions to lands, but I mean, it's available for everybody. I generally don't think you want to be the worst Urza's Saga player in the matchup. You want to have more artifacts than the other person. Constructs or better are better. And that might just mean more access to Urza's Saga or lots of supplemental artifacts like Mox Diamond, Expedition Map. And another Wasteland. Wow. So Wasteland taking out this Maze of Ith, Murktide Regent, just getting in there. 3+1/+1 counters. A chance for more if anything leaves the graveyard. Really the strongest answer for Murktide. Such a beefy creature. Not going to be able to blast zone that away, but you can hold it off nearly indefinitely. I do miss playing against Maze of Ith in Vintage. It was a very interesting card because of the existence of Time Walk. Swing with Psychotog, for example, and if the opponent use their Maze of Ith, Time Walk, untap, and kill them. Very interesting game of chicken. Rob basically has 3 swings. Unlike Blue Red Delver, not going to have anything in the way of rain. I don't believe he has any lightning bolts. Instead, running fatal pushes and snuff outs. Not a ton of red in the deck. It is there for expressive iteration. Card certainly merits additional color. But for removal, you want to be able to bank on just your black and blue mana and wander into red when you actually have the expressive iterations. Very healthy life total, so this Punishing Fire in hand, not going to be able to steal anything that is a consideration when you're playing Death Shadow decks. Every point of life is relevant. Side of Burn Rain. Sometime a trade-off you have to make in order to grow your Death Shadows, but here, Murktide, just a one-man show. Oh, and Death Shadow shows up just for some camera time. That's a wrap. So Murktide kind of went coast to coast there. That card, very, very dangerous. A full graveyard. I know how you would have played that. Gemin did have potentially the chance to set that back using Soul Guide Lantern to exile the graveyard before the Murktide came in, instead cashing it out for a card. Gotta feel like, just in general, a card in hand is better than just getting rid of a handful of cards from your opponent's graveyard, but perhaps that would have been enough to set it back a few turns. Tough one. Urza's Saga hands kind of difficult against Wasteland as well, as they do go away. Unlike 8 cast, not able to just turn it into like a Mox Opal, for example. I guess you can turn it into Mox Diamond, but are still discarding a card from hand. Under digging for Rob. He's going to want a threat, and really anything in his deck potentially good enough. Death Shadow, just 1 mana, potential 12/12. Really like Rob's build. I'm interested in a build that runs Grief along with some copies of Reanimate. Very interesting. I've not had a chance to test it. Been very happy with Cephalid Breakfast. Honestly, it's tremendous results for me. Now, Sphere of Resistance coming down for Gem, and that's going to make all of these efficient spells pretty terrible. I mean, Ponder at 2 mana is not a magic card that anybody would be sleeping up. Certainly not in Legacy. That's effectively what it does. All of these hand trips, all of these efficient cards become so much worse with the Sphere. At one point I had a vintage deck. This is before Sphere Resistance became a mainstay of the format while paired with Mission Workshop. But I just had a Stompy deck that was paired Dark Rituals and Sphere Resistance. It was terrible. But the testing just repeatedly showed that won games when Sphere Resistance came down and you had a clock. As unintuitive as it was, other decks just really struggled to operate. Down a Sphere of Resistance. Deck was terrible. It would literally only win when Sphere came down. When it did, I mean, it's so disruptive. Last Zone, a potential answer. Resistance and Blast Zone feels like a new printing, but I mean, it's been a couple years now. Blast Zone doesn't get nearly the respect that it should. You do see Powder Keg and Ratchet Bomb quite a bit currently. Engineered Explosives, all of these cards kind of in the same type of family. Of course, Blast Zone being able to be recurred, very scary. Back Blast Zone along with a couple of other lands. Keep the board clear of just about any type of threat with this. A little tough on Murktide. We got a lot of counters on, so maybe not him. Certainly Death Shadow. Smaller values. Kind of going back and forth. Yemen has a Grove of the Burn Willows on board. Now that pairs, of course, with Punishing Fire, but versus a Death Shadow deck, sometimes you actually just want to continue to push their life total back up above 13. Especially if you're a deck like this that's going to go for lethal in a single swing. We've got a Thespian Stage down. Once a Dark Depths arrives, doesn't really matter if your opponent's at 13 life or 18 life or 20 life. It's a single shot either way. Keep your opponent away from having counterplay. A Death Shadow that may be worth it. We'll see. Something that always tap it for colorless. But even just during the end step, Grove hasn't been used. Just forcing your opponent to gain a life, keeping those Death Shadows off of Maya, and it looks like Life from Loam. So he has the combo on board right now. He's just jamming a Life from Loam. Interesting. So he could have... Yeah, he could have actually made a 2020 and cast Life from Loam. Oh, never mind. That Dark Depths must be in his hand. So threatening Dark Depths. Pyroblast on board. Surgical Extraction. Gets rid of the life from the loam. This land, there's already Dark Depths in hand. Rob's going to need an answer to this Merit Lage. He does have a speed bump for it in the form of Baleful Strip. That can take a hit. Doesn't have Trample, but there is a Pyroblast on the other side. This is pretty grim. Able to defend. Oh, there we go. Gaining a life during the end step just for kicks. Drinking that Death Shadow. Gemin could potentially copy Grove of the Burn Willows and get rid of this Death Shadow in short order. Already got the Dark Depths. Not sure what answers Rob might have for it. Especially ones that don't get answered by this lone Pyroblast. Very cautious play. Calculate what possible outs Rob could have. Take him off the table. Land. Attempting to take out Thespian Stage. No basics on board. One of my favorite plays. I mentioned basic lands because when it does try to wasteland your Thespian Stage, you can make it a copy of a basic in response that will counter the wasteland on one of the absolute sickest plays that reasonable chance of making. Another sphere. Fifth. Untapping the Death Shadow. Spheres. This is pretty grim. Death Shadow could just be KO'd right now. A pair of Wastelands are fired off. That's going to do it. So we're on to the third game. Now, that Death Shadow was not looking very robust. Rob will have the play in this third one for all the marbles. All right, third game. Gemin going to take a mull. We'll skip over that. Bottom one of these cards, Dryad Arbor. Pretty easy choice. Watery Grave. Into Thoughtseize, doing 5 damage to himself right off the bat. We see a choke along with Exploration and 4 lands. Imagine Exploration's going to be the call. Choke will eventually be an issue, but I mean, Exploration will allow just so much acceleration. Rob's ahead on board. He might be okay with choke resolving even. Wasteland takes out this Watery Grave. Back, but Life from just an ideal card. Grindy games. We see that Gemin drew a Life from the Loam. Applies that, bringing back Wasteland, and then each turn dredging, filling the graveyard with more and more lands. Can win, of course, with Thespian Stage Dark Depths, but Urza's Saga. I believe he's got a Field of the Dead in there as well. I'm not positive that is a option. I think that's a Dryad Arbor. Oh, I guess it doesn't have a power and toughness box. There's a very deceptive Dryad Arbor from the Vault Realms. I actually think it should just be banned from tournament play. And there are certain cards that have been printed where the version is banned. There's a Walled, a German Forest that had the basic Plains art. Those are banned. Thoughtseize. Not allowed to use misprints that potentially mislead your opponent. A lot of firefighting back and forth. 2 cards in hand. Bob did throw a Force of Will, a Life from the Loam. Actually not drawing? Or not dredging, I should say. Button port each turn, slowing the game down. Still no threat on board. Rob's going to ponder here. Definitely been turned into a bit of a grind. A Murktide in hand, though. Potentially close this out pretty fast. Oh, and Surgical Extraction. Look at that. Wow. That's a pretty significant punish. So Life from the Loam was not returned. Intervening turns. Just chilling in the graveyard. Of course, you could potentially Life from the Loam and hit another Life from the Loam, in which case that Surgical is even more punishing. Card from hand down a draw step, but that is pretty brutal. Just a pair of Rashadan ports firing off during the upkeep, trying to slow Rob down, but he's able to brainstorm in response. Have a fetch land to do the shuffle. Trying to get a threat on board. Gemin's got a whole lot of lands here. Down to just 5. Got a Thespian Stage in hand. Not seeing a Dark Depths paired with that yet this match. 2020. Close this out quickly, but right now a 1-mana 6/6. Oh, it's so efficient. Love Death Shadow for that reason. Gemin was going after his mana base the whole time. Like a point of life gained from the Grove of the Burn Willows. Still 5 damage coming through. Right, here we go. Dark Depths. 2020 is possible here. Bob have an answer, or will this be the end? A very tight match. Forcing the issue, he's swinging. Gemin's just moving in now to make the 2020. 4 blocks. Oh, and we've got Brazen Borrower's other half. Petty Theft. So much utility to this card. Turning a non-land permanent, but also a 3/1 flyer on the other side. Wow. So the Merit Lage is mopped up by this side of Brazen Borrower. Death Shadow connects to Gemin's head. He is facing down a Death Shadow with a Brazen Borrower waiting in the wings. Continuing to use those ports, hoping to not fall farther behind. Little surprised that Rob not opting to float that mana. Am the Brazen Borrower. Instead, we see another Death Shadow. Down to just 1 life here. Blast Zone. Death Shadow. A 6/6 right now. Only 1 damage needs push through. He's going to go ahead and crack the map. Grabs the Blast Zone. He's got 2 mana open. Two mana open, cannot activate the Blast Zone. That is a wrap as Rob takes down the ELD Legacy Open. That stunning playmat along with a huge chunk of our 100% credit payout. We are doing these every month. Be sure to check out our website for all of our upcoming events. Every weekend we're doing some type of open series event. Legacy once a month, team events once a month. Now we're doing CEDH. Definitely check that out if you are local or looking to take a fun road trip down. Love to see you here at ELD's Time Vault Games.